were done to prove that Yahweh was supreme over the other Elohim, or the other gods, the gods of Egypt, of whom Pharaoh was a representative of. The other thing we looked at was that all of this sequence of events, this story was facilitated in some ways by Pharaoh's resolve not to give in or acknowledge Yahweh, a resolve which about halfway through, Yahweh started strengthening to kind of almost push him to continue doing what he already had set out to do in the beginning, to ensure his complete defeat, which we'll see at the end of this. And then finally, James talked about how this was a demonstration of Yahweh's faithfulness and power to the Israelites. And we watched the Israelites were almost being trained in faith throughout this process. But then also that this was designed to demonstrate Yahweh's power and faithfulness to the nations, including the Egyptians, but the rest of the world who were bearing witness to what was happening. Today, I feel like I have not much new to add, but to point out how all of those themes are kind of confirmed, or they show up again in this final 10th sign and wonder. And so we're kind of just going to work through that, tease out a couple of those themes. So this is the final showdown, or at least it feels like it is, the big climactic end to what's happening. And after this, Pharaoh's finally going to listen. I'm going to spend a little bit of time kind of framing this before we get into the text and we read about this final strike by Yahweh. Remember that way back in the beginning, when Moses first came to Pharaoh, he came up to Pharaoh and said, "Hey, Yahweh says, release my people so that we can go hold a pilgrim feast in the wilderness." And Pharaoh's response was, "Who is Yahweh that I should obey him by releasing Israel? I do not know Yahweh, and I will not release Israel." That was who's that? I don't know who that is. So that is where we started, and we will see that by now Pharaoh has figured out at least something about this Yahweh. He knows that he's real and powerful. So on one hand, we have Pharaoh, who in the initial stories in chapter 1, it's not the same Pharaoh, because the initial Pharaoh in chapter 1 died and another one took his place. But it's clear that this Pharaoh is kind of meant to represent the same concept as the first Pharaoh. And the first Pharaoh was portrayed as cunning and a little slippery and really evil, and some language that definitely pulls in phrases that were used about the serpent in the garden. He tried to get rid of the Israelites, tamp down their population through some sort of sly ways, tried to recruit the midwives to help him, and then eventually said, "All right, just throw all the boys in the river," right? Kind of went for it. And that's who we have. He's like an archetype of evil in this story. And as we've seen throughout these stories of the plagues, he continually hardened his heart, which Kent talked about in his sermon, could be translated more like strengthened his resolve, or hardened his mind. The heart is not necessarily a place of feeling in Hebrew, but it includes thinking and decision making. And then on the other hand, we have Yahweh, who, when he first met Moses in the wilderness, in the burning bush, declared that his name was the one who is, or he said, "I am who I am." And there's, I think, good evidence to point that the name Yahweh itself, it refers most directly to a phrase, something like the one who is. He is the one who exists and the one from whom existence proceeds. So he's the one who made everything and the one who sustains everything. And I think that is a big part of these plagues, and I'll get to that in a little bit. So, and we know that when we're reading Exodus, because the authors of Exodus assume we read Genesis, right? So we know, oh yeah, he made everything. It makes sense that he's the one who exists. He's the one who brings existence about. And this this fact, since we know that, it almost makes Pharaoh saying, "Who is Yahweh?" like a joke a little bit. Like he said, "Who's that?" He says, as he uses breath that Yahweh gave him and speaks with a body that Yahweh made. Like it's kind of, oh yeah, it's ironic. You're totally unaware of who has created you. And the signs and wonders, they start and end with what the first, with the response to what the first Pharaoh did. So the Nile turns to blood in response to Pharaoh throwing the Hebrew boys into the Nile River. And then the last one, the firstborn of sons of Egypt die in response to Pharaoh killing the sons of Israel. I don't know if I still have any faithful few among you who are reading through the Torah with me in the Bible Project app that I plugged back in January. But if you are, and you happen to also listen to the podcasts that are associated with the readings, you have heard the last couple, maybe 2 weeks ago, they started going through the plagues, and they had a podcast where they talked about it. And something that they discussed that I found very interesting in the light of this, some of these concepts of who Yahweh is, was showing connections based on the language and like the Hebrew phrasing that we find in each of the plagues, that links us back to the creation story in Genesis. Some of the same kind of concepts that we saw in Genesis, we see repealed in the plagues. And it makes this plague sequence less about just a vindictive God, like picking various things to do, oh, that will hurt him, and more of a picture of creation being undone or no longer sustained. In the same way that the flood in the same way that the flood narrative was a decreation narrative. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll just point out a couple to kind of bring that picture into our mind. So in the creation stories, especially the first one, the one with the days, on day 1, this happened, day 2, this happened. Creation is shown as Yahweh creating order out of chaos. So everything is just murky, and then the Spirit of God comes across, and then stuff starts getting like separated and put in place where it belongs. So, the waters go where they belong, the land comes out of them, and the sky goes up there, and the waters above the sky go up there. And then, so in the flood story, all of a sudden that all fell apart because the waters just came up out from the ground where they weren't supposed to be, and the waters came from above, and it created this flood. So in Genesis, the water swarms with water creatures, and the land is filled with land creatures. And in the second plague, the frogs swarm in the water and then jump out onto the land and fill everyone's houses. That's not right. Those aren't supposed to be out on the land. They're supposed to stay in the water. In Genesis, the dust of the earth is used to create man. And in the third plague, Moses strikes the dust and it becomes gnats and flies around and afflicts everybody. And the Egyptian magicians say, oh, it's the finger of God, because they can't do it themselves. And then in Genesis, the humans, after everything is done and it looks great, they're told to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And in the fourth plague, the flies fill the land and swarm. And that swarm word is the same as fill the earth. We don't translate it that way in Genesis, because to say, be fruitful and multiply and swarm everywhere. Well, not as nice, but it's the same word. And actually, it's the same phrasing that was used the first chapter of Exodus to talk about what the Hebrews were doing over in Goshen. They were just having babies and they were swarming everywhere. So here, the flies fill the land and swarm instead of the humans who are supposed to. But this is the first one that doesn't happen in Goshen, where they're already multiplying and swarming and doing what they're supposed to do over there. In Genesis, Yahweh causes all manner of plants and vegetation to sprout, and in the 7th and 8th plague, hail destroys most of it, and then the locusts are brought in by a wind, which is the same word as Spirit of God. They come in and finish the job and clean up all the vegetation that's left. And then finally, the 9th plague, in Genesis, God starts this off by saying, let there be light, and the exact same phrase in Hebrew is used in the 9th plague, where he tells Moses to extend your hand and say, let there be darkness. was dark. It's a darkness so thick it can be felt. That's what it says. Except for in Goshen. And of course, finally, the death of the firstborn sons are a removal of Yahweh's gift of life. So I just point that out as a way of showing that this was Yahweh demonstrating that I am the one who makes this all happen. And when I step back, it falls apart. You should know who I am. You should know my name. He says, let them know that I am Yahweh 7 times throughout the plagues. Number 7 shows up a lot in Hebrew texts as a complete statement of a thing. So he has made his point. Yahweh formed creation, and if we read in the New Testament, like especially that Colossians verse where it says that Jesus is the one who all things were created through him and for him. He is before all things, and all things are held together in him. This concept that creation occurred in the past, but it's sustained still today by our God. And if he were to step away, it wouldn't be like the deists who you make it and step away and God doesn't need to be there to make it run. He needs to be here in order to keep it in order. And if he steps back, it falls apart. And this is true both for creation and for humans. As we see, Pharaoh is a great example of what happens to a human when Yahweh is not involved. All right. This sets the stage for our passage today. I'm going to read this. So we're going to be in Exodus chapter 11. And I am going to read verses 1 through 10 of chapter 11, or the whole chapter 11, I guess. And then just the end of chapter 12. So I'm skipping over a lot of the texts discussing the Passover, though we will be referring to it. Nita is going to be kind of diving into the Passover next week. So I'll start in chapter 11, verse 1. The Lord Yahweh said to Moses, I will bring one more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt. After that, he will release you from this place. When he releases you, he will drive you out completely from this place. Instruct the people that each man and each woman is to request from his or her neighbor items of silver and gold. I would love to have listened to one of those conversations. Hey, just wander in. Have your gold and silver. All right. Now, Yahweh granted the people favor with the Egyptians. Moreover, the man Moses was very great in the land of Egypt, respected by Pharaoh's servants and by the Egyptian people. What a turn for Moses. Like, he had his story has really gone up and down, and now he is renowned. Moses said, this is what Yahweh has said. About midnight, I will go throughout Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt will die. From the firstborn son of Pharaoh, who sits on his throne, to the firstborn son of the slave girl, who is at her handmill, and all the firstborn of the cattle. There will be a great cry throughout the whole land of Egypt, such as there has never been, nor ever will be again. But against any of the Israelites, not even a dog will bark, against either people or animals, so that you may know that the Lord Yahweh distinguishes between Egypt and Israel. All these, your servants, will come down to me and bow down to me, saying, go, you and all the people who follow you, and after that, I will go out. Then Moses went out from Pharaoh in great anger. It's like a mic drop. He stormed out of the throne room. Yahweh said to Moses, Pharaoh will not listen to you, so that my wonders may be multiplied in the land of Egypt. So Moses and Aaron did all these wonders before Pharaoh, but Yahweh hardened Pharaoh's heart. He did not release the Israelites from his land. All right, then in chapter 12, Yahweh is giving Moses and Aaron instructions on what the Israelites are supposed to do to prepare for this Passover moment. And we're going to skip ahead to verse 29 of chapter 12. It happened at midnight. Yahweh attacked all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the prison, and all the firstborn of the cattle. Pharaoh got up in the night, along with all his servants in all Egypt, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was no house in which there was not someone dead. Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron in the night and said, get up, get out from among my people, both you and the Israelites. Go, serve Yahweh as you have requested. Also, take your flocks and your herds just as you have requested and leave. But bless me also. The Egyptians were urging the people on in order to send them out of the land quickly, for they were saying, we are all dead. So the people took their dough before the yeast was added with their kneading troughs bound up in their clothing on their shoulders. Now the Israelites had done, and as Moses had told them, they had requested from the Egyptians silver and gold items and clothing. But Yahweh gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, and they gave them whatever they wanted, and so they plundered Egypt. The Israelites journeyed from Ramses to Succoth. They were about 600,000 men on foot, plus their dependents. A mixed multitude also went up with them, and flocks and herds, a very large number of cattle. I'm going to stop there. So, in response to Pharaoh's continued refusal to listen despite Yahweh's demonstration of power throughout this whole sequence, Yahweh now brings a very dark sign and wonder. And it's, again, is in response to Pharaoh's dad, maybe, I'm not sure. His first, what he did to the Israelite children is now going to happen to the Egyptian children. But it's unlike Pharaoh. Yahweh has provided a way out of this one, both to the Hebrews and I think I can show you to the Egyptians as well. He has provided instructions that we skipped over when I was reading it for this Passover to happen, for a safe space that in a house that is properly prepared, just like an ark that saved Noah from the flood in the midst of that decreation moment. And this safe space will need to be prepared using a substitute for the firstborn son, just like Abraham was given a substitute for Isaac on the mountain. And that's kind of what I call that. All right, an interlude. I would like us to try to imagine what this scene felt like in Egypt for Pharaoh, for Moses, for the Egyptians, for the Hebrews. We're told that the Yahweh had granted the people favor with the Egyptians, and that Moses was renowned, respected both by Pharaoh's servants and by the Egyptian people. And I think in my mind, I often consider like Pharaoh and the Egyptian people to be a unified thing. But at least that text gives me a clue that that might not have been the case. At this point, can you imagine the politics of a nation in which these plagues are continuing to come down from above, and Moses keeps coming up and saying, hey, if you don't let us go, this is gonna happen. And then he leaves, and then it happens. I mean, people's livelihoods were destroyed. I'm sure many people were dying before this. The crops were all gone. It had to be a madhouse. It was crazy. And if Pharaoh's servants were respecting Moses and listening to him, I have to think that Pharaoh's court was probably a place of strife and controversy, as Pharaoh continued to say, yeah, okay, we'll let them go. Nah, just kidding, we're going to keep them. And then another thing would happen over and over and over. I don't think he was a very popular ruler at this point. So this is really interesting because I got kind of stuck on this, trying to see if there's any way to learn more. And I was curious what Jewish folklore said about this. So I was reading what they did for the cedar and stuff like that. But I found this really interesting passage in a commentary on the Psalms that references the Exodus. From what I can find, this was written in the 12th century, and I have no clue if this is true or not. But I thought that it was an interesting picture to hold in our heads. So this rabbi wrote this: when God sent the plague of the firstborn, all the firstborn Egyptians went to speak to their fathers and said, everything which Moses has said has come true. Don't you want us to live? Let us get the Hebrew slaves out of our homes now, otherwise we are dead. The fathers answered, even if all of Egypt dies, they are not leaving. All the firstborn gathered in front of Pharaoh and screamed, "Please remove the Hebrews. Because of them, evil will befall us and you." Pharaoh said to his servants, "Remove the protesters and break their knees." What did the young Egyptians do? Each took a sword and killed his father. That's the passage. Okay, this is written in the 12th century. It may be just like a rumor passed down. Did some rabbi make that up sometime? Possibly, could be. But I thought like, wow, I actually could see how some of that could go down. Like if you were a firstborn in Egypt and you heard Moses say that, and you heard the rumor that Moses said that throughout the land, that would be pretty startling because you've experienced a lot of crazy things in a row, 9 of them, in fact. And another thing that jumped out to me of that is when I think of this play, I often am considering firstborn like infants, but that's not necessarily the case. Firstborn meant firstborn. So there are many adult firstborn people, males, firstborn males of any type. So when it says that someone died in every house, it didn't just mean the kids, it could have been the dads too, and the brothers. Right. So hold that in your head. And then I think that there are some other clues in the passage here that may indicate that some of the Egyptian people had joined with the Israelites. The first is that is what I mentioned already, that the people had favor with the Egyptians in chapter 11. And then that's repeated in verse 33, where they start giving them their stuff. Now, what kind of favor was that? Was it like, wow, you guys are great, I want to hang out with you? Or was it, I'm so scared of you, take my jewelry? Probably more of the second. And then secondly, in verse 38, chapter 12, verse 38, where it says, a mixed multitude also went up with them, and flocks and herds. And it had just finished saying that there were this many men on foot plus their dependents. So what does mixed multitude mean? Most commentators that I encountered did indicate that this probably meant that there were some non-Hebrew people with them who left. And then finally, in chapter 12, verse 19, which we didn't read, hold on. Yes, where he's talking about the Passover, the first section on the Passover instructions. He says, he's talking about how for 7 days yeast must not be found in the houses. If there is somebody who eats something made with yeast, that person will be cut off from the community of Israel, whether a resident foreigner or one born in the land. And then down in verse 43 through 49, he talks about, it first says, no foreigner may share in eating it. And then it starts to say, a foreigner or an outsider can't eat of it, they just have to be circumcised first. It's a little unclear because these two passages, which I'm not spending a lot of time with, seem in some ways to be written for Moses to tell the Hebrew people, like right now, you guys, tonight, we got to do this. And also in some ways, like in the future, in our nation, we're going to be doing this later. And this is how, these are the rules for it. So it's a little unclear which of those rules apply where. So I'm telling you, I don't know for sure, but it seems like there's some indication that some of the Egyptian people may have been able to join some of these safe houses to avoid this plague. And I want to just pick up something that James talked about last week, which was that in the end, this story is not just a fairy tale about the good Israelites who are suffering and the evil Egyptians, and God strikes the Egyptians and then the Israelites get out and they're happily ever after, like that neat little box. This story is about Yahweh making his name known for the sake of the Israelites, because he has promised their ancestor that he will care for them, but also in the end to bring about the redemption of all of humanity. And this is his means of doing so. And we see in later texts, like the one James read from Isaiah chapter 19, where it's like an oracle about Egypt, and it starts talking about how bad Egypt is, and everything fits really nicely into what you kind of picture from this. And then all of a sudden he switches to and that day there's going to be an altar to the Lord in the middle of Egypt, and a monument to the Lord at its border. Skipping down a little bit, the Lord will make himself known to the Egyptians, and they will acknowledge Yahweh. They will worship with sacrifices, grain offerings. They'll make vows to Yahweh, keep them. Yahweh will strike Egypt with a plague. He will strike them and heal them. they will turn to Yahweh and he will respond to their pleas and heal them. And then it describes this highway between Egypt and Babylon and Israel and how they will. Egypt, blessed be Egypt, my people, Assyria, my handiwork, and Israel, my inheritance. This like coming together of these great these two evil nations that have opposed Israel in so many ways. This is like the end goal. Along with this, keeping in mind, is like we saw Pharaoh opposing Yahweh in such a blatant way. And then the Hebrews, like Yahweh saving them. But we will soon see that they are no paragons of dependence on Yahweh. Like they're about to fall apart in just another chapter here. And all of the different human parties here, none of them are behaving perfectly. All right, pulling back from that, just to look at some more things about the text here. In the aftermath of this event at midnight, Pharaoh's firstborn is struck, who would be considered like a descendant of the gods of Ra, right? Because of the line of succession is at least how we think that the Egyptian pantheon was structured. And so a true demonstration of Yahweh destroying the gods of Egypt. And we now have Pharaoh, who initially said, "Who is Yahweh that I need to listen to him?" Now saying, "Get up, get out from among my people, you and the Israelites, go serve Yahweh as you have requested." Like he knows who he is now. "And take your flocks and herds," because that was always a big thing. It was always like, yeah, you can go, but you can't take your flocks. But now, just get everything out. And leave. And then he has this little sentence at the end of verse 32, and it says, "But bless me also." And I don't know, I would love to know the intonation, the nuance of how that phrase came out. Like, was he like broken and saying, "Just get out and bless me on your way"? Or was he saying like, "Get out of here. Okay, fine, you can have your way. But since I'm doing you the favor of letting you go, give me a blessing on the way out"? I'm not sure which one of those two it was. There is a sense where this little sentence reminds you of Jacob, the heel-grabbing deceptive person who was wrestling with Yahweh and wouldn't let go and said, like, "I won't let go until you bless me." There's a little bit of a sense of that here. So I'm not sure exactly what Pharaoh's, how this phrase came out of his mouth, but we know that it won't last, that very soon he's going to turn back and say, no, we're going to get them after all. And thereby Yahweh will bring his ultimate destruction because of his endlessly hardened heart. Okay. So to pull some of these things together, this concept of decreation, so just as Yahweh sustains creation and keeps things going, keeps things ordered, he also sustains humanity. And Pharaoh is the best demonstration of how when humans do what they want to do, it ends in our own destruction. And often, it also is a great demonstration of how often we will see throughout the rest of the Bible, like often God uses our own desires to bring about judgment on ourselves, destruction on ourselves. When humans do exactly what they want to do without accountability and caring about others, things get awful really fast. You can see the aftermath of Russian soldiers leaving parts of Ukraine as a perfect demonstration of that right now. Sometimes I think I see myself acting as Pharaoh when completely aware of the wrong that I'm about to do and the futility of it. I'm aware of all the evidence pointing to this thing I'm about to do being a really bad idea. Not only because Yahweh said no, but also because of the effects it has on me and others. And yet I just don't stop myself anyway. I just do it. And then we also will see, like I said, in the few chapters, that the Egyptians and Pharaoh and the chosen of Yahweh, the Israelites, they aren't so different in their inability to really know Yahweh, to like understand what he's about. And it's about, like, this story is going to get really unflattering for like all humans involved, except for Moses mostly. And even with this like tremendous effort, this demonstration of who he is, that Yahweh has just gone about like saying, I'm the one who sustains all this stuff, the Israelites are about to fail all sorts of tests in a little bit. And I wonder what it would have felt like to be an Israelite on the eve of Passover, waiting for midnight. Like Moses just gave you all these instructions. You're supposed to, there better not be yeast in here. And they had to kill your favorite lamb and put blood places, and then you're just supposed to stand there waiting. That's terrifying. Like, despite the fact that the last few plagues have spared Goshen, and there's definitely a sense of like, oh, okay, this Yahweh seems to be, he's on our side. Like James mentioned this last week, it had been 400 years with not much of a peep that we know of. And then all of a sudden Yahweh's back with Moses saying, okay, guys, we're good to go. We're going to get out of here. And boy, this is a rapid change for a whole people group to say, like, okay, we're in on this. What did it feel like to be sitting there waiting for midnight? And I think that sometimes I see myself in a spot like that, where I'm like, I'm overwhelmed. I'm doing kind of my best. I'm a little unsure about what's about to come, and I'm trying to trust that it'll work out, that I'm doing the right thing. I'm trying to believe that Yahweh is in control, and that he is for me, that he's on my side, because I need both of those things. And often if I succeed at that, it only lasts a little bit before a little bit of doubts come back in and it falls apart. And so I don't know, I'm kind of placing those two options up. It's like A and B, they both happen in my heart, and they are not, neither of them are quite the right options, right? There's a third one where we are truly trusting and seeing Yahweh's faithfulness to his people despite their doubts, and remembering who he is, really knowing him. And that is what we seek to reach. And that is, I kind of would like us to sit in that tension and like thinking through some of the ways that our humanness in relation to Yahweh is present as we await the Easter and Passover sermon next week. And as we go through if any of you are doing the Seder meals this week, like really holding that, like, oh, what would this be like to be doing this meal, waiting for whatever's about to come. All the land is being given over to death, but a chosen remnant is about to be ransomed by a substitute. And we'll sit in anticipation of this as we wait Easter. So in this 10th plague, this strike, sign and wonder, we see Yahweh's faithfulness to the Israelites. We see his justice towards Pharaoh and his mercy by creating this means of escape, despite Pharaoh and despite whatever doubts the Hebrews may have had. And though he is like beyond us and kind of overwhelming sometimes to try and think through, he is for us. I'm going to pray. And then we will have Pascha. And we will pray for us. Father, thank you for this story. There's so many layers to it, and I'm sure we're missing parts. I'm grateful that you are the one in control, that you sustain creation and you sustain humans, you sustain us. And I just pray that you would fill us with a sense of needing you, to trust in your way, to guide us through this coming week. And as we anticipate celebrating Easter next Sunday, may what you've done to rescue us become more and more real, that our need for it. And yes, I praise you for being a faithful God who cares for humans despite the ways that we consistently fail to follow you well. Okay, Hasakah.